Welcome once again to Detective Duo, a home for timeless voices and enduring mysteries, from the sharp eyes of Tommy and Tuppence to the hidden corners of England's past. Subscribe if you enjoy these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from today. The wind off the Thames came like a thief that night, sharp, invisible, and intent on stealing the warmth from anyone foolish enough to stand still. Tommy Beresford hunched his collar higher and blinked the flakes from his lashes as he peered up at the Harrington Hall Hotel. Its facade gleamed against the dark river mist, every window spilling gold light onto the frozen pavement. Beside him, Tuppence tucked her gloved hands beneath his arm with brisk determination. "You'd think London could arrange its weather to suit a Christmas gala," she murmured. "If the British climate ever did what was expected of it, old girl," said Tommy, pushing open the glass door, "half our history books would read like fairy tales." Inside, the air was honeyed with clove pomanders and mulled wine. The lobby shimmered beneath garlands of holly and polished brass. Footmen in red livery whisked cloaks from guests, while the soft thunder of laughter and orchestral tuning drifted from the ballroom beyond. "Ah," Tuppence breathed, surveying the crowd, "the upper crust at its glittering best, and, I dare say, its guiltiest." Now," said Tommy, "you promised no sleuthing until after the pudding." "Did I?" She smiled sweetly. "I must have meant after the coffee." They had been invited by Major Lionel Wilton, a friend from their intelligence days. Steady, anxious Lionel, now treasurer of the Harrington Christmas Fund. He waved from across the room, spectacles flashing. "Tommy! Tuppence! Splendid!" he called, hurrying over. "Haven't seen you since— Oh, the awful affair in Devonshire. Still detecting together, eh?" "Only socially," Tommy said. "You mentioned this was a charity event. We do adore a good cause." Wilton adjusted his bow tie. Yes, though I'd rather be auditing a munitions depot. Too many titled egos, too few honest ledgers." A flicker of worry crossed his face, and Tuppence caught it at once. "You look pale, Lionel. All well with the accounts?" He hesitated. "Perfectly sound. Perfectly. Though Sir Peregrine Vale intends to review procedures, as he puts it." "That sounds ominous." "It always does when Sir Peregrine says it." Before they could press him further, a small procession swept into the hall. At its head, Lady Veronica Ambrose, chairwoman of the fund, moved like a swan through a crowd of ducklings. Her gown was silver satin, her diamonds real, and her smile precisely measured. "Lady Veronica," Lionel murmured, "our patron saint of propriety, and the bane of Sir Peregrine's existence." Behind her came Sir Peregrine himself, tall and ramrod straight, his face the colour of good parchment and twice as unforgiving. He nodded to Tommy and Tuppence with military precision before turning to chastise a waiter for the incorrect angle of a champagne tray. "Cheerful soul," Tuppence murmured. "Retired civil auditor," Lionel whispered, "believes virtue can be quantified to 2 decimal places." "And that fellow?" Tommy gestured to a square-jawed man at the bar, his voice carrying easily across the din. "Cassius Gray, American donor. Charming, rich, and exactly as trustworthy as a roulette wheel." At that moment, a ripple of laughter floated from the stage where a woman in a scarlet gown was rehearsing with the orchestra. "Our entertainment," said Lionel. "Miss Ivy LaRue, torch singer. The press adore her." "And the gentleman," Tuppence added. They were soon introduced all round. Ivy's handshake was cool and perfumed. Her eyes flicked restlessly between the men. Cassius Gray boomed with good humour, ordering champagne for the room. Lady Veronica's civility was brittle. Sir Peregrine's courtesy felt like an audit. While Tommy fielded a monologue from Mr. Gray about philanthropy, American style, Tuppence wandered near the refreshment table. A young maid was polishing glasses there, biting her lip. The girl's apron was too neat, her nerves too raw. "Busy evening, isn't it?" Tuppence said gently. "Yes, ma'am," the maid stammered. I beg pardon, I must see to the ballroom." She glanced toward the heavy oak doors with something like dread. Tuppence followed her look. Beyond, she glimpsed chandeliers, white linen, a towering Christmas tree hung with crystal snowflakes, all perfectly festive, on the surface. "She looked as though she'd seen a ghost," Tuppence murmured when Tommy rejoined her. "More likely the head housekeeper," he replied. "Terrifying woman. I salute from instinct." The orchestra struck up a bright waltz. Servants hurried to and fro, bearing trays of bubbling glasses. Yet beneath the gaiety hummed an odd undercurrent, snatches of half-heard conversation that died when one drew near, sharp glances exchanged like signals. Sir Peregrine's voice carried above the music. "An announcement later this evening, Lady Veronica. I think it will steady a few shaky nerves." Lady Veronica's answering smile was carved from ice. "Let us hope it does not unsteady the donors, Sir Peregrine." A moment later, the electric lights trembled. The orchestra faltered. Someone laughed nervously. Then, as quickly, the power steadied again. "Just the storm," Tommy said. "Or nerves," murmured Tuppence. She bent to pick up a discarded Gala programme, folded and scribbled upon. Along its margin someone had drawn a crude Christmas tree, its branches marked with capital letters. Down the list of carols more initials ran in strange sequence. She slipped it into her evening bag. "Collecting autographs," Tommy teased. "Patterns, darling. Life is so dull without them." At 8 o'clock precisely, a gong sounded. Guests swept toward the ballroom, drawn by light, music, and the promise of champagne. "Come along, Mrs. Beresford," said Tommy. "Our dance card awaits." "Indeed," she said, glancing back once at the trembling maid who lingered by the doorway. "But I suspect this evening's entertainment won't end with a waltz." Snow ticked against the windows as the great chandeliers flared to life. The orchestra played, glasses chimed, laughter rang, but beneath it all something else stirred, quiet and watchful. For somewhere among the glittering guests of the Harrington Hall Christmas Gala, the first move had already been made. The ballroom at Harrington Hall was a scene of winter splendour. Evergreen garlands looped along the gilt balconies, silver ribbons cascading from chandeliers, and a Christmas tree that reached the corniced ceiling, each branch dusted with glass icicles that caught the light like frozen fire. Beneath it all hummed a sea of conversation, laughter, and clinking crystal, the sort of polite gaiety that hinted at nerves underneath the glitter. Tuppence stood with her champagne untouched, eyes half-lidded in that deceptively casual way Tommy had learned meant she was cataloguing everything within sight. She had already noticed the scratches on the clasp of the diamond snowflake brooch displayed near the raffle table, faint but unmistakable, as though someone had fumbled with it impatiently. A trivial detail, perhaps, but in Tuppence's experience trivialities tended to prove otherwise. Across the room, Sir Peregrine Vale prowled. The man moved like an officer inspecting trenches rather than a philanthropist at a gala. He stopped before each group, spoke curtly, nodded without warmth, and moved on. Guests melted away before him with the same instinct as soldiers stepping aside for a superior. Lady Veronica Ambrose, meanwhile, presided near the dais, graceful as frost. Her speech had been all charm earlier, promising renewed confidence in the fund's noble purpose. But even from across the ballroom, Tuppence could see that her smile had the tensile strength of spun glass. Ivy LaRue's smoky contralto drifted from the stage, where she rehearsed with the orchestra, each note languid, seductive. Mr. Cassius Gray leaned against a pillar nearby, blowing a long plume of cigarette smoke that smelled faintly foreign. "American blend," Tommy observed as he joined Tuppence, sniffing the air. "Hard to find since the war. He must know a fellow at customs." "Or several," said Tuppence lightly. "And they probably all owe him something." Tommy followed her gaze toward Elsie, the maid they'd seen earlier, who was now near the cloakroom corridor. The girl's eyes kept darting toward a half-open door marked private, her fingers white against the tray she held. "Poor little thing looks as if she's guarding the crown jewels," Tommy remarked. "Or a secret," said Tuppence. "Those are much heavier." Sir Peregrine's voice cut across the music, crisp, exacting. "Before Epiphany, Wilton. I said before, and I meant before." Lionel Wilton, pale and sweating despite the cool room, murmured something inaudible. Tuppence caught only the word audit, and the tone in which it was said, half plea, half protest. Lady Veronica appeared at Wilton's elbow, her smile returning like a mask being lifted. "Gentlemen, surely this isn't the time," she said. "It's Christmas after all." Sir Peregrine inclined his head, his expression softening not a whit. "Integrity, Lady Veronica, does not observe holidays." "That depends," murmured Tuppence, "on whether one's integrity is being examined or doing the examining." Tommy smothered a grin. "My dear girl, you could make even a saint sweat." At that moment, the choir began a rehearsal of The Holly and the Ivy. The carol swelled sweetly through the ballroom, pure as snowfall, and then, oddly, repeated a verse exactly. Every note, every tempo mark, precisely the same. Tuppence frowned. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" said Tommy. "The refrain. It was identical. Almost too identical. Unless Miss LaRue's chorus has developed machine-like precision overnight, I'd wager it was a recording." Before Tommy could answer, Lady Veronica crossed swiftly to the stage, her composure momentarily cracking. "That will do," she said sharply. "Thank you, choir. We'll resume later." Ivy looked startled, the conductor confused. The musicians shrugged. But when Lady Veronica turned back to the crowd, her voice was syrup once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. Just a rehearsal quirk." Tuppence's eyes glimmered. Quirks don't make chairwomen flinch. Tommy was spared a reply by the arrival of a broad-shouldered man in an evening coat, his moustache trimmed with military precision. "Beresford!" he exclaimed. "Good heavens, I thought you'd retired to the countryside." "Inspector Harding," Tommy said, shaking his hand. "I might say the same. What brings Scotland Yard to a charitable soiree?" "Purely social," Harding replied, grinning. "The hotel manager's a friend, but if there's mischief afoot, I see I'm in good company." He gave a meaningful glance toward Tuppence, who smiled demurely. "Only holiday cheer so far," she said, "though the cheer does seem a touch brittle." "Then let's hope it doesn't shatter," Harding said, accepting a glass from a passing waiter. A chime rang through the hall. The orchestra subsided. Lady Veronica mounted the dais beside the towering Christmas tree, the fairy lights casting silver on her gown. "Friends," she began, "thank you for joining us in the spirit of goodwill and generosity. Tonight's gala reminds us that even in uncertain times, compassion unites us all." Polite applause rippled. Sir Peregrine stepped forward next, lifting his glass. His voice carried easily, sharp as the edge of cut glass. "I propose," he declared, "a toast to honesty in charity, to transparency in all dealings, and to the courage to face scrutiny when it's due." There was a murmur through the crowd, admiration from some, unease from others. Lady Veronica's smile didn't waver, but her hand tightened imperceptibly on the lectern. Sir Peregrine went on, "As many of you know, I've had the privilege of serving on the board this year, and I intend, after tonight, to publish the charity's full accounts in the Morning Register for the public's review. Consider it our Christmas gift to the donors who trust us." The applause this time was hesitant, like rain on tin. Tuppence caught Wilton's ashen expression, Lady Veronica's barely perceptible intake of breath, and Ivy's curious glance toward the American. Mr. Gray merely smiled, tapping ash into a crystal bowl. "Well," murmured Tommy, "nothing like a public audit to spice up a party." "Indeed," said Tuppence, "and nothing like an announcement of exposure to invite trouble." The speeches wound down, and champagne was served again. Amid the bustle, Tuppence's eyes caught a curious detail, a champagne flute waiting near the lectern, rimmed faintly with a shade of lipstick, a deep, uncommon cranberry, neither bright nor red, but somewhere in between. It did not match Lady Veronica's softer pink. It was bolder, rarer. "Notice something?" Tommy asked. "Just that fashion can sometimes be incriminating," Tuppence murmured, studying the glass. The orchestra launched into a dance tune. Conversation swelled again, laughter louder now but forced. Sir Peregrine stood alone for a moment, expression grim, as though weighing the fallout of his pronouncement. Then, with the air of a man who would rather confront cannon fire than small talk, he strode toward the refreshment table. From somewhere behind them, the clock in the vestibule struck 9. Each chime seemed to settle the air into something heavier, more expectant. Tuppence leaned toward her husband. "Do you feel it, Tommy?" "Feel what?" "That." She gestured subtly around the glittering hall. "It's as if everyone's pretending the evening is still ordinary, when in fact it's already changed." Tommy glanced towards Sir Peregrine, who was now speaking with Lady Veronica, their voices low, their smiles purely decorative. "You think something's ticking," he said. "I know it," said Tuppence softly. "The question is, when will it go off?" And somewhere behind the laughter, beneath the clink of crystal and the rustle of silk, the clocked plan began, quietly, inexorably, to count down. The dinner plates had barely been cleared when the first rumble of sleet began against the ballroom windows, faint as whispered applause. Outside, the December night pressed thick and white against the glass. Inside, the air glowed with warmth and champagne. The raffle drum had been wheeled in, its brass gleaming under the fairy lights, and the great tree that dominated the far end of the hall shimmered with 1,000 glass ornaments. Tuppence thought the evening might almost have regained its footing after Sir Peregrine's earlier bombshell. Almost. The chatter had returned, the laughter a shade too bright, the band tuning with mechanical cheerfulness. Yet beneath the music there was that same faint unease, that tremor of something waiting to happen. She leaned toward Tommy. "It's like an orchestra before a storm," she murmured. He smiled wryly. "Let's hope the roof holds out." On stage, Ivy LaRue took her place, framed by the tree and its glittering snowflake ornaments. Her gown was black velvet that caught the light in ripples, and her voice, when she began to sing, was low and sultry, a smoky thread winding through the air, coaxing even the most jaded guests to silence. Inspector Harding, standing near the back with his hands clasped behind him, nodded appreciatively. "Good pipes," he said. "Good distraction," Tuppence murmured. Then it came, a flicker, barely a breath, as the fairy lights trembled and the chandeliers dulled. A gasp rippled through the crowd. For a heartbeat, the world turned pearl grey, every face blurred, every gesture froze. And then, just as swiftly, the light steadied again. "Only the storm," Lady Veronica called, her voice tight but bright. Yet before relief could take hold, a crash rang out, a sharp, crystalline shatter that sliced through Ivy's melody. Sir Peregrine, who had been standing by the lectern with a glass raised, staggered. His hand clutched at the air, the flute slipped from his fingers and broke on the parquet in a spray of light. He made a choking sound, a half-formed word, and collapsed heavily to the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then the orchestra faltered into silence, chairs scraped, and the crowd surged forward in confusion. "Good God," breathed Lionel Wilton. He's... "Stay back," barked Inspector Harding, vaulting the dais rail. "Give him air." Tommy was already there, steadying Lady Veronica, who had gone pale as marble. "It's all right," he said firmly. "No one leaves. Harding's here." Tuppence dropped to her knees beside the fallen man. The parquet was cold beneath her gloves. Sir Peregrine's face had turned a waxen grey, his eyes wide and unfocused. A faint, sweet, bitter scent lingered near his mouth, something that prickled memory. She bent closer, careful not to touch the glass shards scattered around him. On the lapel of his jacket, glinting like a misplaced star, was a tiny fragment of glass, curved, delicate, and tinged with silver. She plucked it free with her handkerchief. It looked, she thought, suspiciously like a splinter from one of the tree's ornaments. Inspector Harding knelt opposite her. "Well, Mrs. Beresford?" "I'm no doctor," she said softly, "but I'd wager he's beyond any help." The hotel's resident physician, fetched from the dining room, confirmed it minutes later. "Gone," he said grimly, wiping his hands. "Poison, I'd say. Digitalis, perhaps. The speed—" He broke off as murmurs swelled among the guests. Lady Veronica straightened, her composure snapping back like a steel clasp. "Please, everyone remain calm. No one is to leave until Inspector Harding gives permission. The weather would prevent it in any case." Outside, the wind howled its agreement. Ivy LaRue descended from the stage, her voice trembling. "I swear I didn't see him. He was right there, and Oh, heavens, I was singing the whole time." "No one's accusing you, Miss LaRue," Harding said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Lionel Wilton sank into a chair, hands trembling. "Ruin," he muttered. "This will ruin us all." Mr. Gray bristled. "Ruin? What about the poor devil on the floor? I'd say he's the one ruined." "Please," said Lady Veronica sharply, "this is a tragedy, not a spectacle." Tuppence rose, her mind already assembling fragments. The sweet, bitter scent. Digitalis, yes, but mingled with something resinous. The glass shard, from a tree ornament perhaps. And on the lectern, just visible beneath a sheet of paper, a faint damp ring, as if a glass had been set down and swiftly removed. She touched Tommy's arm lightly. "Darling, look there, the ring." He bent to see. So he didn't set his glass down himself. Or someone changed it for him. Harding glanced between them. "You think he was targeted?" Tuppence gave a small smile. "My dear Inspector, when a man announces he's publishing everyone's accounts in the Morning Register, he rarely dies by accident." Harding's mouth twitched despite himself. "Point taken." "Tell me," said Tuppence, "was anyone standing close enough during the power dip to have exchanged his glass?" Harding frowned, replaying the moment. Lady Veronica was on his right, Wilton to his left. A waiter approached just before the song began. Dark hair, hotel livery. Tuppence scanned the room. And where is he now? But the waiter in question was nowhere to be found. Only Elsie remained by the corridor, white-faced and rigid, the empty tray shaking in her hands. When Tuppence met her eyes, the girl looked away quickly. The guests were shepherded to chairs as Harding's men began securing the exits. Outside, the sleet intensified, battering the windows like thrown gravel. The great tree still glittered, indifferent and perfect. Lady Veronica moved to the dais again, her voice measured. "This is an unspeakable shock. Inspector, I insist you conduct whatever inquiries you must hear, discreetly. Harrington Hall's reputation will survive," Harding interrupted. "If its conscience is clear." Tommy gave a short laugh under his breath. "I do like that man," he whispered to Tuppence. She didn't answer. She was studying the programme she had tucked into her bag earlier, the one with the crudely drawn Christmas tree and strange initials down the side. She aligned them now against the evening's running order, the carols, the raffle, the speeches. When read vertically, the first letters formed a single phrase, Tree Star Palm Midnight. She frowned. Coincidence? Or a code? Across the room, Lionel Wilton mopped his forehead with a handkerchief. Ivy had retreated to a chair, twisting a strand of pearls around her fingers. Mr. Gray smoked furiously, though the staff had asked guests not to, and Lady Veronica stood very still, one hand resting on the lectern, her eyes fixed on the storm-lashed windows. "Harding," said Tommy quietly, "we've a room full of nerves and motives. I'd advise keeping everyone in plain sight." The inspector nodded. "Agreed. No one leaves this ballroom until morning." As the orchestra instruments were covered and the lights dimmed to half, the mood curdled into a strange, heavy silence. The glitter, the music, the laughter, all gone. Only the sleet remained, hissing softly at the glass, as if the storm itself approved of the sudden stillness. Tuppence slipped the folded programme back into her bag, her eyes glinting with something between curiosity and resolve. "Well," she said quietly to Tommy, "it seems the gala's become rather more interesting than advertised." He sighed, adjusting his tie. "You're incorrigible, Tuppence." She smiled faintly. "And you, my dear, are about to be very busy. Because in the heart of Harrington Hall, beneath the chandeliers and snowflakes, with a corpse cooling by the lectern and a storm sealing every exit, a new case had just begun. A sound like the sea pressed against the windows of Harrington Hall, the storm rising, sleet flinging itself at the glass in furious handfuls. Inside, the ballroom was an island of trembling calm. The body had been taken to a side room, the champagne cleared away, and the music silenced. What remained was the echo of gaiety, like laughter after a quarrel. Inspector Harding stood near the dais, coat off, sleeves rolled, the picture of unflappable authority. "Right," he said briskly. "No one leaves. The yard can't get through in this weather, and the lines are patchy. We'll have to keep things tidy until morning." The hotel manager, a nervous man with a pencil moustache, nodded agreement. "Of course, Inspector. I've instructed the switchboard to route all calls through the operator. And the doors, bolt them," Harding finished, "from the inside." He turned to Tommy Beresford. "Beresford, I'll need your help keeping the guests steady. Some of them will talk easier to a gentleman without a badge." Tommy inclined his head. "You're quite right. Tuppence will assist you in the practical side, I imagine." From the far end of the room came her dry voice. "Already am." Tuppence had commandeered a waiter's napkin and was using it to cover key areas like a field marshal plotting a campaign. The orchestra stand, the lectern where Sir Peregrine had fallen, and the drinks tray still littered with glasses. Her quick eyes flicked over each surface. "Napkin, my dear?" Tommy asked, approaching. "Evidence cloth, if you please," she replied. "You men with officialdom always forget that fingerprints prefer linen to formality." Harding's mouth twitched. "Carry on, Mrs. Beresford." Tuppence knelt beside the lectern. carefully lifting a shard of glass with the corner of a menu card. The tiny piece caught the light, curved, glittering, and faintly tinted. She held it under her nose and inhaled delicately. "There it is again," she murmured. "That sweet, bitter scent. Digitalis, perhaps, and something else, a whiff of resin. It's from one of the tree ornaments, I'd swear to it." She slipped the shard into an empty matchbox and marked it with lipstick initials. Harding joined her. "So, the poison might have been delivered by a drink, but through the ornament?" "Or the other way around," said Tuppence thoughtfully. "Perhaps the ornament was only the carrier, something to disguise a trace or to be broken at the right moment." "Accidental?" Tuppence gave him a look. "My dear Inspector, nothing about this evening has been accidental since the first fairy light flickered." The suspects were gathered now in uneasy clumps, steaming cups of coffee between their trembling hands. The atmosphere had shifted from guilt to grit. Lady Veronica Ambrose sat upright on a sofa, her silver gown immaculate, her expression controlled. She was the picture of composure, perhaps too perfect. Lionel Wilton huddled nearby, face grey and eyes sunken, his spectacles misted from nervous breathing. Ivy LaRue, still in her stage gown, smoked a cigarette with trembling fingers, the smoke curling like a veil around her. Cassius Gray stood apart, hands in his pockets, chewing his lip with American impatience. And in the corner, half hidden behind the coffee urn, was the maid, Elsie, her eyes darting like those of a frightened bird. Harding surveyed them. "A small company," he said softly, "and one of them's a murderer." "Not a pleasant ratio," Tommy murmured. Harding drew a slow breath. "Let's be systematic. Mrs. Beresford, what's your reading?" Tuppence folded her arms. "Lady Veronica is poised, almost rehearsed. She could have orchestrated every minute of this evening. She certainly had the authority. Lionel Wilton had the motive. Sir Peregrine's promised audit would have exposed him by dawn. Miss LaRue, she was near the lectern during the dim-out, a glass in hand, and her lipstick leaves a signature one can spot across a ballroom. Mr. Gray, on the other hand, reeks of opportunism. His cigarettes are American and contraband, meaning he has means to move things quietly. And Elsie?" Harding raised an eyebrow. "The maid?" "She's terrified," said Tuppence. "Terrified of something other than her employer." Harding nodded slowly. "I'll have them each in turn. Beresford, keep the rest from tearing each other apart." While Harding began the formal questioning in the adjoining anteroom, Tuppence roamed the ballroom again. The tree loomed above her, its decorations glittering like a galaxy. The lights cast shifting shadows, warm and festive, yet somehow menacing now that the laughter was gone. Near the orchestra stand, she noticed a small portable phonograph. A record sleeve lay beside it. Carols for choir, rehearsal copy. She placed a finger on the turntable. The label bore faint smudges of clove-scented polish, the same scent from the broken ornament. A slip of paper sat next to it, half tucked under the tablecloth. For emergencies. "Curious," she said aloud. "A rehearsal disc in case of emergencies. How very organized." She turned as Elsie entered quietly, carrying another tray of coffee. The girl's shoes squeaked on the polished floor. "You're still working?" Tuppence asked gently. "They said to keep serving, ma'am, to keep folks calm." "And you? Are you calm?" Elsie's lip trembled. "I never seen death before, ma'am. Not like that. One minute he was talking, the next—" She broke off, staring at the tree. "I told them those lights was wrong, flickering like they did. The switchboard couldn't steady 'em." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "You were near the switchboard, then?" "Yes, ma'am, just for a bit. Fetching ribbon from the raffle table. But when I came back, one spool was gone." "Ribbon?" "For the raffle tickets, ma'am. Red silk. There were 3 rolls and then only 2. Tuppence's mind ticked over. Ribbon. Slender, flexible, easy to tie or thread. "And you're quite sure it was gone before the accident?" "Yes, ma'am, I'd swear it." "Thank you, Elsie. And don't fret. You've been very helpful." When the girl left, Tuppence knelt to inspect the base of the tree. She noticed that one of the lower branches hung oddly, the ribbon trailing as though cut short. Beneath it, on the carpet, a faint smudge. A single muddy snowprint too small for a man's shoe. She bent closer. It faced inward. Whoever had left it had been leaning in or reaching out. Tommy approached behind her. Harding's halfway through the interviews, he said softly. Wilton's sweating buckets. Gray's offended anyone would think he's dishonest. Lady Veronica hasn't blinked since tea was poured. And Ivy? Distraught but playing to the gallery. Keeps saying she was under the lights, seen by everyone, which of course she was. Tuppence rose, brushing her hands. I've found something better than tears. Look there. She pointed at the snowprint. Tommy whistled low. So someone leaned out that narrow balcony window during the storm. What for? To toss something, or retrieve it. He followed her gaze to the balcony doors. They were latched now, frost feathering the panes. Whatever they tossed, Tommy said, is probably buried under a foot of sleet by now. Perhaps, she murmured, or perhaps it was never meant to be found, Harding's voice called from the next room. Beresford, Mrs. Beresford, if you please. They joined him in the anteroom, now transformed into a makeshift interrogation chamber. The suspects sat apart, their shadows long and restless against the wallpaper. Harding looked grave. No confessions, no contradictions, but plenty of nerves. Lady Veronica insists the audit was a misunderstanding. Wilton admits to an accounting lapse. Nothing criminal, he says. Ivy's glass can't be found, and Gray claims his were all refilled by the same waiter, the one who's vanished. And Elsie? Asked Tuppence. She's too frightened to lie, Harding replied. Says she saw nothing, but her timetables, interesting. Tuppence's eyes flicked again to the phonograph. Inspector, she said softly, I believe this entire evening was choreographed to the second, and something tells me that missing ribbon was part of the choreography. He regarded her curiously. To tie what together? Not what, said Tuppence, her eyes gleaming. When? The ballroom was silent again when they returned, the tree casting its soft, ghostly glow over the polished floor. The sound of the storm filled the spaces between their words. Tuppence stood by the window, watching flakes tumble through the darkness. It's strange, she said quietly. Hours ago this place was all sparkle and laughter. Now it's a cage of secrets. Tommy joined her, hands in his pockets. Well, darling, he said, we've been in worse cages. Perhaps, she said, but not with so many birds ready to sing. And outside the wind howled as if echoing her thought. By the time the clocks in the lounge struck 11, the chandeliers of Harrington Hall had dimmed to a soft amber haze. The power lines outside, heavy with sleet, crackled and faded. A few bulbs sputtered out completely. Candles were fetched, tall, elegant ones from the dining tables, and stubby, emergency ones from the hotel's store. They flickered along the mantelpieces, turning the grand ballroom into something more intimate and more unnerving, a place where truth might slink into corners and whisper behind one's ear. Inspector Harding stood at the room's centre, sleeves rolled and expression grim, while Tommy Beresford served as unofficial usher, coaxing the anxious guests into order. Tuppence had commandeered a side table as her makeshift command post, a notepad, the phonograph disc, and a length of red ribbon laid out like relics. Let's begin, Harding said. We'll take them one at a time. Lady Veronica, if you please. The chairwoman rose with impeccable poise. Her silver gown shimmered faintly in the candlelight, and her fur stole framed her face like a halo of winter. I imagine this is all quite dreadful for you, Inspector, she said smoothly. It is for all of us. Sir Peregrine was a man of integrity. Too much, perhaps. Harding motioned for her to sit. You knew he planned to publish the charity's accounts. I did, and I told him his method was misguided. Public scandal would ruin donor confidence. The poor would be the first to suffer. Her tone was firm but controlled, as though addressing a committee rather than a police inquiry. I urged him, she continued, to postpone the audit until after Christmas. We could have resolved the matter privately. But Peregrine, well, he had the righteousness of a crusader. Tuppence regarded her thoughtfully, a dangerous quality in a man with an audience. Lady Veronica's gaze flickered briefly toward her. Yes, Mrs. Beresford, and even more dangerous when one forgets that charity depends as much on trust as on truth. Tommy, from the corner, raised an eyebrow at Tuppence, who made a small note with deliberate slowness. Harding leaned forward. And where were you, Lady Veronica, during the power dip? With the choir, she replied promptly. I was helping distribute the candles for their carols. Of course, Tuppence's tone was neutral. Ever the organizer. Lady Veronica smiled thinly. I do try. She rose, sweeping away in a drift of perfume and silver folds. "Next," said Harding, "Miss LaRue." Ivy LaRue approached with the grace of a woman used to being watched. Her velvet gown drank the candlelight, her eyes glinting like jet. She sank into the chair with a sigh. "Sir Peregrine and I, well, we had our differences," she began, her voice low and measured. "He was a moralist, and I am not." "You quarrelled?" Harding asked. "Not exactly. He disapproved of publicity stunts, of glamour used to promote the cause. I may have," she paused delicately, "cultivated a little attention in the press." Tommy grinned. "A dangerous habit in this country. The English prefer their virtue unadvertised." She shot him a rueful look. "I wouldn't know. I'm from Cincinnati." Harding's voice was dry. "There were rumours of blackmail, Miss LaRue, that Sir Peregrine intended to expose you." Her laugh was soft and without mirth. "Blackmail? No. He wanted to teach me integrity, whatever that means. He said I'd learn humility before the year was out. Perhaps he meant to write me out of the concert program." "And where were you when the lights flickered?" "On stage, singing my heart out. Every eye was on me." "Yes," said Tuppence softly. "Every eye, except the one that mattered." Ivy looked confused but said nothing. When she had gone, Lionel Wilton came in, pale as candle wax, his hands trembling as he fiddled with his glasses. "Sir Peregrine was a good man," he said at once, his voice cracking, "but inflexible. You can't run a charity like a battlefield." Harding gave him a long look. "Tell me about the missing funds." Wilton groaned. "It wasn't theft, I swear it. Only temporary advances, money from the reserves covered by expected pledges that never arrived. I thought I could replace it before the audit." "Yet Sir Peregrine discovered it." "Yes." Wilton's shoulders slumped. "He wanted to make an example of me, to show the world no one was above reproach. I begged him for a week, just a week, but he refused." Tuppence studied him closely. "So his exposé would have destroyed your reputation?" He nodded miserably. "And the charities. I'd have confessed eventually. I wanted to, but I didn't kill him." His hands were shaking so violently now that Tommy poured him a cup of coffee and pressed it into his grip. "Drink up, old chap," he said kindly. "It's a rough business, Conscience." Wilton left muttering thanks, and Harding called, "Mr. Cassius Gray." The American entered with his customary swagger, though the shine of confidence had dulled a little. He leaned back in the chair, folding his arms. "Now, Inspector, let's save time. You think I did it because I had the money and the nerve, right?" Harding's mouth twitched. "Something like that." "Well, I didn't. Sir Peregrine didn't like me, but plenty of people don't. In the States, philanthropy's business, not sainthood. You sponsor a cause, you get naming rights. Peregrine called that vulgar." "He insulted you?" "He sneered, sure. Said I was buying virtue by the yard. I told him he was selling it by the ounce." "Where were you during the power outage?" Gray shrugged. "At the bar, lighting a cigarette. I couldn't see a thing, but I sure as hell didn't poison anyone. I drink whiskey, not champagne." As he strode out, Tommy murmured, "If self-confidence were evidence, we'd have him tried and hanged by midnight." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Confidence isn't guilt, but guilt often hides behind it." At last came Elsie. The girl's uniform was still damp at the hem, her apron rumpled. She perched on the chair like a sparrow caught indoors. "I didn't do nothing, Ma'am," she said before anyone spoke. "I swear it." "No one's accusing you, Elsie," Tuppence said gently. "We just need to know what you saw." Elsie wrung her hands. "I was in the cloakroom, Ma'am, before the music started again. I saw someone come in. A lady. She was tall with a fur collar, real elegant. She had a glass in her hand and a hanky wiping at her lipstick. Cranberry colour it was. She polished the glass rim and said it had to shine. Then she left." Harding leaned forward. "Could you see her face?" "No, sir. Only her shape in the corridor light. I dare not name her." "You must." "I can't, sir. Not without being sure. I've no wish to lose my place." Tuppence reached across the table and covered the girl's hand. "Then don't name her. Just remember every detail." Elsie nodded gratefully and fled the room. Harding exhaled. "So, we have a tall woman with a fur collar, cranberry lipstick, and a reason to handle a glass unseen. Not much to go on." "On the contrary," Tuppence said, "it's everything." When the suspects had gone, Tuppence crossed to the phonograph, where the rehearsal disc waited. She wound the crank and set the needle down. The choir began The Holly and the Ivy, sweet and precise. Then, without pause, the same verse repeated, perfectly matched in timing and tone. "Listen," she murmured, "no breath between, no page turn, no shuffling. It's mechanical." Harding frowned. "You mean recorded?" "Exactly. The choir wasn't singing live during the dim-out. The recording covered the gap." "Then the power flicker wasn't an accident," Tuppence finished. "It was the cue." She picked up the red ribbon from her table and stretched it across the floor, measuring the distance from the lectern to the phonograph. It reached neatly to the corner where the cloakroom corridor began. Tommy whistled. So one could pull the ribbon, start the record, and have the carol play while swapping glasses, without ever crossing the floor. "A distance murder," Tuppence said softly. "Music for the eyes while death moved in silence." Harding stared at her, half admiring, half dismayed. "You make it sound like theatre." "It was theatre," she replied. "Every moment of this evening, rehearsed, timed, choreographed. The only thing unscripted was Peregrine's last breath." The candles guttered as a gust swept through the cracked window pane. Shadows leapt on the walls like dancers bowing. Tuppence replaced the ribbon carefully, her expression thoughtful. A ribbon to trigger a song, a glass polished till it gleamed, and a crusader silenced by the very virtue he preached. Someone planned this performance down to the final note. Tommy touched her shoulder. "And who, darling, do you think conducted the orchestra?" She gave a small, knowing smile. "Oh, we'll know soon enough. When the curtain rises again, the guilty always take centre stage." The storm had strengthened through the small hours, drumming its fingers on the windows of Harrington Hall as though demanding entry. Inside, the ballroom glowed faintly under candlelight and the weary hiss of the last electric sconces. The guests had retreated to their rooms, but Tommy, Tuppence, and Inspector Harding remained. The body of Sir Peregrine had been moved to a side parlour, and the tree, once magnificent, stood now like a monument to a ruined feast. Tuppence sat before the phonograph, her eyes on the record spinning silently under her gloved hand. "The carol that didn't breathe," she murmured. Tommy, half dozing in a chair, blinked. "I beg your pardon?" She nodded toward the silent turntable. A recording of the choir, flawless to the second. No breaths, no rustle of pages, no imperfection. When the lights dimmed, the music carried on, but the voices weren't real. Someone used that illusion to distract the room and make a switch. Harding rubbed his chin. So during the blackout, attention was fixed on the stage, the sound steady and familiar. Whoever changed Sir Peregrine's glass did it unseen. "Precisely." Tuppence rose, smoothing her skirt. "Let's reconstruct it." She moved to the lectern where the faint ring of moisture had dried to a pale halo. Here stood Sir Peregrine, glass in hand, delivering moral thunder. The lights dip, the choir continues seamlessly, holding every eye forward. A single hand, calm, deliberate, replaces his flute with another, already primed. Harding leaned over the evidence tray. "You think the poison was already mixed in? Not dropped at the last second?" "Oh, it was prepared earlier," said Tuppence. "Digitalis is subtle but deadly. Its bitterness can be disguised, perhaps in a sweet syrup, pre-swirled so that every drop seemed innocently uniform." She turned the broken ornament shard over in her fingers. "And the scent I noticed, sweet edged with pharmacy, was not perfume, it was residue." Tommy frowned. "Then the question isn't how he was poisoned, but who had time and knowledge to prepare the dose." They began their tour of the smaller rooms, Harding with his notebook, Tommy with a torch, Tuppence with instinct. The corridor to the conservatory was lined with potted palms that trembled under the draught. At the far end, a small cabinet stood locked. Its brass latch had been forced and crudely reclosed. Harding knelt, examining the splintered edge. "Tampered with? What's kept inside?" The hotel's housekeeper, summoned in flannel dressing gown and indignation, sniffed. "Floral tinctures, sir, for the conservatory displays. Small bottles of foxglove solution among them. Marked poison, of course. Only staff with keys may open it." "Keys," murmured Tuppence. "And who among the staff had access tonight?" "Only myself and the head maid," said the woman sharply. Though yesterday one key went missing for several hours, I found it returned this morning." Harding exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "Elsie admitted borrowing it, didn't she? Said she used it to polish brass before dawn." "Indeed," Tuppence said softly, "and she might have returned it, unaware of what had been done while it was gone." They moved on. In the anteroom beyond, a cold draught swept through the balcony doors, which rattled faintly against their latches. Tuppence pushed them open. The sleet slapped her face, cold and wet, and the balcony rail glimmered with frost. Evergreen garlands, stiffened with ice, sagged between the columns. She brushed one gently and caught it. A faint thread of dark ribbon stiffened, its end fluttering weakly in the wind. She held it up in triumph. "Another ribbon," she said, "and look where it leads." The other end had snapped, but its direction pointed straight through the doors toward the anteroom, the very space where the phonograph sat. "A pull cord," said Tommy. The murderer didn't even need to cross the floor. One tug from this doorway could have started the record, giving them both the carol and their cover. Harding whistled. Ingenious devil. And risky, if anyone noticed the ribbon. "Ah," said Tuppence, but this was a gala of distractions. Glitter, laughter, champagne. No one looks at the floor when they're looking at fame. They stepped back inside. Tuppence's eyes darted to Lionel Wilton's leather satchel, abandoned on a chair. Frost glittered faintly across its surface. She touched it. Her fingers came away wet. "Mr. Wilton," she said, when he entered at Harding's summons, "you've been out to the balcony recently?" He started. "No. Well, yes, for a moment. The air in there. I couldn't breathe after he fell." "Of course." Tuppence's tone was kind but sharp-edged. "But this frost suggests you set the bag down on the sill itself. Why?" He hesitated, colour draining. I may have leaned there. I wasn't thinking." "Perhaps not," she murmured, though her eyes said otherwise. Ivy LaRue appeared next, still wrapped in her velvet shawl, her lipstick reapplied to perfection. She produced a silver cigarette case from her clutch and opened it to reveal nothing. "All out," she said lightly. "I've been borrowing from our American friend." Harding nodded. "Mr. Gray smokes imported blends, doesn't he?" Ivy smiled faintly. "And doesn't he enjoy telling everyone? Still, they do steady the nerves." Tuppence took the case delicately and inspected it. Inside, the polished lid bore a single lipstick print, deep cranberry. She closed it and returned it. "That's a handsome shade, Miss LaRue. Hard to find." "It's an American brand," Ivy replied. "Limited shipment. I doubt you'd find it here." "Perhaps not," said Tuppence, glancing toward the ballroom doors. Lady Veronica entered just then. Her poise undisturbed, though fatigue shadowed her face. She held herself with queenly dignity, even among flickering candles and the faint chill of suspicion. "Inspector, are we to endure this all night?" she asked coolly. "Until I have answers," Harding said. Tuppence approached her with the air of a woman inspecting fine china. "Lady Veronica, you wear lipstick, of course?" "Most women do, Mrs. Beresford." "What shade tonight, may I ask?" "Cinnamon rose." Lady Veronica reached into her beaded bag and withdrew a tube, holding it up like a sceptre. Tuppence examined it. The tone was soft, muted pink, not the deep cranberry she had seen on the champagne flute in Ivy's case. "A beautiful colour," she said smoothly, "flattering in candlelight." Veronica inclined her head. "I've worn it for years. Why?" "Oh, no reason," said Tuppence, her eyes dancing. "Merely admiration for good taste." The lady's smile was small and cold. "Then I thank you." When she left, Harding muttered, "Playing games, Mrs. Beresford?" "Not at all," Tuppence said. "Merely tuning the orchestra. We're beginning to hear the false notes." She turned her attention next to the choirmaster, who had hovered uneasily near the phonograph since their discoveries began. A mild, balding man, he twitched whenever questioned. "I only manage the music, madam," he stammered. "Nothing more sinister than harmonies and descants." "Of course," said Tuppence. "But the baton you used, may I see it?" He handed it over reluctantly. Tuppence sniffed it. A faint scent clung to the wood, spiced and medicinal. "Clove oil," she said. "It preserves polish," he said quickly. "The same oil the staff used for the ornaments." "Indeed," she said softly, handing it back. "And the same oil that laced the punch bowl, the ornaments, and perhaps even the tainted flute. How fortunate, one scent masking another." When he departed, Harding turned to her. "So, what have we gained, Mrs. Beresford?" She smiled faintly, crossing back to the phonograph. A clearer picture. Someone rehearsed every second of this crime. They needed timing, control, and the confidence to orchestrate both sight and sound. They used the recording to hide the switch, the ribbon to trigger it unseen, and scent to camouflage poison. Tommy folded his arms. And all our suspects are conveniently rehearsed types. Actors, socialites, and a woman who's chaired more galas than the Lord Mayor. Tuppence nodded. Exactly. The noose is tightening, but not yet round the right neck. She stared at the great tree. The lights trembled faintly as a gust slipped through the cracks in the window. At the highest branch, the paste snowflake ornament, a harmless twin to the missing brooch, caught the candlelight like frozen lightning. Sir Peregrine's killer, she said softly, didn't just murder a man. They composed a symphony of deceit, and every note still lingers in this hall. The phonograph clicked off, the record spinning into silence. Outside, the wind sighed like a ghostly choir, the one that hadn't breathed. The ballroom had grown colder as dawn crawled behind the curtains. Candles guttered in their brass holders, pools of wax collecting like pale ghosts on the floor. Inspector Harding stood at the hearth, his coat collar up, while Tommy paced near the grand tree, its ornaments dull now, its beauty tired. Tuppence sat at one of the long buffet tables with her notebook open, her pen scratching quietly. "Time," Harding muttered, glancing at his watch, "for another round." "Interviews?" Tommy asked. "Confessions," Tuppence corrected lightly without looking up. "You can learn a great deal from people who've been awake too long." Harding gave a short nod and gestured to the door. "Bring in Mr. Wilton." Lionel Wilton entered, gaunt and pale, the perpetual tremor in his hands now a full shiver. His spectacles caught the candlelight as he sat, clutching his ledger satchel to his chest, as though it could protect him from judgment. "I won't pretend any more," he blurted. "Yes, the accounts were short. Temporary advances, that's all. I took them because donations promised from the Milverton estate hadn't arrived. I meant to replace every penny." Harding's voice was calm. "You're saying Sir Peregrine discovered this?" Wilton nodded miserably. "Yes. He threatened to expose it, of course, but then he sent me this." He fumbled in his satchel, withdrawing a folded sheet. The inspector unfolded it, scanning the short typewritten message. "Meet me in the palm room at midnight. We'll discuss the matter quietly. No need to alarm the committee." It was signed Peregrine Vale. Tommy leaned in. "So you were to meet him after the gala?" "Yes, but I swear I never did. He was already gone." Tuppence took the letter from Harding, her eyes narrowing. "May I?" She held it under the lamplight, tilting it. The signature was perfect. The curl, the downward stroke of the P, yet something about it jarred. "Tell me, Mr. Wilton, did Sir Peregrine usually sign his letters so close to the margin?" Wilton blinked. "What? No, I never noticed." "You should have," said Tuppence softly. "This signature's been cut and pasted. A photographic copy from another document. You've been sent a forgery." Wilton's face blanched. Then who?" "That," she said, "is the question of the night." Harding frowned. "A forged meeting note, why?" Tuppence looked toward the lectern. "To lure our timid treasure out of sight at the crucial moment, perhaps. When the lights dipped, the murderer needed as few eyes as possible." Tommy nodded. "And Wilton would have been a convenient suspect if caught wandering near the scene." The inspector rubbed his chin. "Someone staged this entire evening like a play. Letters, recordings, timing, a theatre of authenticity." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Exactly. And every scene perfectly rehearsed." Mr. Cassius Gray came next, immaculate even after a sleepless night. His American accent cut through the stale air like the crack of a whip. "I'll say it plain," he began. "Sir Peregrine didn't like me. Thought I was cheapening the whole enterprise with corporate vulgarity." He smirked at the phrase. "If it's vulgar to keep money flowing, then God save the aristocracy." "Your company withdrew its sponsorship this afternoon," Harding said quietly. Gray blinked, then gave a short laugh. "News travels fast." "I had the telegram," Harding replied, holding up a folded sheet. "The withdrawal was approved at 2:00. Only one person here knew that before the gala, Lady Veronica Ambrose." Gray's mouth tightened. Well, well, so our patron saint of discretion's been gossiping. Perhaps she feared your reaction, said Tuppence lightly. Anger can be unpredictable. He met her gaze squarely. You think I killed him for pride? I could buy this hotel twice over. I don't poison men over wounded feelings. Yet you were seen arguing with him before dinner. Gray shrugged. A difference of philosophy, not of temper. Tommy smiled faintly. And in business, Mr. Gray, philosophy usually has a price tag. Gray gave a sharp laugh and stalked out, the smell of tobacco following him like a flag. Ivy LaRue entered next, wrapped in her velvet shawl like a cocoon. She was pale beneath the powder, eyes red-rimmed, though not from tears alone. I suppose, she said bitterly, it's my turn to be accused. No one's accusing, Harding replied evenly. We're gathering facts. Then gather this. I didn't kill him. I flirted, yes, perhaps more than was wise. He enjoyed the attention, and I enjoyed being seen. That's all it ever was. Tuppence tilted her head. You said earlier Sir Peregrine wanted to teach you integrity. What did that mean? Her laugh was harsh. He wanted to control me, darling, to make me some sort of model for virtue. When I refused, he threatened to tell the press about a little publicity arrangement I had, a so-called romance arranged for the gossip columns. It wasn't a crime, just showmanship. But if he'd exposed me, I'd have been finished in London. Harding's tone sharpened. And yet your alibi holds, if the choir was truly singing. Tuppence interjected softly. But it wasn't. The recording played in their place, meaning every sound in that room was smoke and mirrors. And in smoke, Miss LaRue, even innocence can look guilty. Ivy's lip trembled. I was on the stage, Mrs. Beresford, under the lights. Ask anyone. I will, said Tuppence, but even spotlights cast shadows. Ivy's hands twisted in her lap. You think I switched his glass? Tuppence regarded her steadily. No, I think you were too busy being looked at to notice who did. When Elsie was brought in, she looked smaller than ever, her apron creased, eyes wide and hollow. She clutched her hands together as if they could keep her from shaking apart. Please, ma'am, she whispered to Tuppence. I don't want trouble. I've told the truth already. I believe you, Tuppence said kindly, but you must tell me the rest. The lady you saw in the cloakroom, the one with the fur collar. Do you know who she was? Elsie hesitated, eyes darting toward the door. I daren't say. It had cost me my place. Tuppence's voice softened. I promise no harm will come to you. It was Lady Veronica, the girl breathed at last. I only saw her from behind, but I'd know that fur anywhere. She was wiping her lipstick off a glass. I thought maybe she'd smudged it. Then she left, quick-like. Thank you, Elsie, said Tuppence quietly. You've been brave. As the maid slipped away, Harding exhaled slowly. So, Lady Veronica was in the cloakroom just before the collapse. Tommy frowned. Wiping lipstick off a glass, that sounds deliberate. Or guilty, said Harding. Tuppence tapped her pen against her notebook. Let's not jump. It could have been to remove evidence or to plant it. The more perfect a case looks, the more likely it's been arranged. Harding poured himself a coffee. You think Lady Veronica's behind it, don't you? She fits, Tuppence said. Motive. Her reputation, the charity's survival, perhaps even blackmail if Sir Peregrine threatened to expose her late husband's dealings, means total command of the staff, access to the recording, the ribbon, the glassware. Opportunity. She was in the right place at the right time, and the wrong place just before. Tommy looked uneasy. It's too neat. Exactly. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. Neatness can be design. She rose, pacing slowly before the tree. Suppose it began with the forged letter. Our dear Lady Veronica needed Wilton out of the way, so she, or someone under her orders, produced a summons he would trust. That removed the nervous treasurer from the floor. She gestured toward the phonograph. Then came the recording, the choir's perfect loop, set to mask the light's flicker. A pull of the ribbon from the cloakroom, and the carol starts automatically. Everyone watches the stage, no one the lectern. She stopped by the tree, plucking a crystal ornament between two fingers. At that same instant, a preloaded glass, perhaps poured earlier, replaces Sir Peregrine's own. The poison, concealed in a dissolved syrup, is already mingled. Harding followed her reasoning with narrowed eyes. And the ornament shard you found? An accident, she said. Perhaps the vial was hidden in one of these baubles, easy to disguise amid so many. When it shattered, a sliver stuck to his coat. Tommy nodded. So the entire murder hinged on timing and theatre. Yes, Tuppence said softly. But here's what troubles me. The real diamond snowflake brooch is missing from its case. The one on display was a paste imitation. Theft as distraction, or an insurance policy if the murder went wrong. House staff had mounted the paste snowflake high on the tree for effect. The true brooch had never returned to its case. Harding crossed his arms. Or both. A killer who stages theatre always writes themselves two endings. Tuppence smiled faintly. And yet, Tommy prompted, Lady Veronica is too perfect a culprit. Every clue leads to her door as though arranged for our convenience. I distrust convenience, Tommy chuckled. You'd distrust a halo if it shone too evenly. Quite right, she said. Perfection, dear Tommy, is the murderer's oldest costume. They stood a moment in the dim light, listening to the storm gnaw at the windows. The ballroom smelled faintly of candle wax and wilted pine. Harding snapped his notebook shut. All right, we'll rest an hour, then press on at dawn. Something tells me the lady of the hour won't sleep much either. Tuppence gathered her notes, her voice barely above a whisper. She may not have to. For once, I think the truth will come to us. And above them, the mistletoe hung silent and heavy, witness to more than romance that Christmas night. The storm had not relented. Sleet still whispered at the tall windows like a thief fingering the latch. Within the grand ballroom, only the tree still shone, its topmost ornament, the silver star, gleaming faintly through the dimness like a solitary eye. Tuppence sat before the remnants of the Gala's programme, the paper smoothed out across the table. Beside it, her pencil hovered, her mind ticking through letters and meanings with that particular blend of intuition and logic Tommy had learned to both admire and fear. Now then, she murmured. Tree, star, palm, midnight. Tommy looked up from his chair by the fireplace. If you're composing poetry, darling, I'd suggest a rhyme for midnight. It might cheer the inspector. Tuppence smiled faintly. It's not poetry, it's direction. Direction? Yes. Look, the capitals written down the side of the carol list. If you take the first letter of each scheduled event and the last letter of each corresponding carol title, you get this. Tree, star, palm, midnight. Not random at all. It's a message. Inspector Harding, who had been standing by the door conferring with a constable, turned sharply. A message? From whom? From the person orchestrating the whole ghastly charade, said Tuppence. Tree, star. That's the highest ornament on the Christmas tree. Palm, the palm room. Midnight, the meeting Wilton was meant to attend. The sequence gives locations and timing. Someone used a child's acrostic to direct their accomplice under the very noses of every guest. Harding frowned. A code hidden in the programme of the evening. Tommy whistled softly, and no one the wiser. Clever devil. Yes, said Tuppence. Standing. Clever and vain. A person who delights in performance, and in leaving a signature only the perceptive might read. She folded the programme neatly. We start with the tree star. The climb to the choir loft was narrow and dust-scented. The electric sconces along the stairwell flickered feebly, casting more shadow than light. Harding followed first, muttering about safety standards. Tommy came behind, holding a candle whose wax dripped perilously close to his sleeve. The loft opened above the ballroom, a gallery lined with worn hymnals and music stands. The air was colder up here, faintly perfumed with the pine and polish rising from below. Tuppence's eyes scanned the rafters. There, she pointed to a small maintenance door at the far end. It's how the lighting cables must be serviced. Harding pushed it open with care. Beyond lay a narrow catwalk, a mere plank of wood bolted between beams. It led toward the balcony cornice that ran along the hall's upper edge. Good Lord, Tommy muttered. One wrong step and you'd drop into the sopranos. Tuppence knelt, examining the dusty surface of the plank. Look, a heel mark, fresh enough to disturb the dust. Someone was up here recently. Harding crouched beside her. That explains how they managed the ribbon to the phonograph. From this perch, a ribbon could be threaded through the rafters down behind the curtains to the phonograph's switch. Pull from here, and the record starts. No one below the wiser. Tuppence nodded, holding the length of recovered ribbon against the space. It stretched nearly to the exact distance. Just so, and if you slipped while leaning to tie it, you'd leave that skid mark, finished Tommy. It's all beautifully theatrical. Tuppence's gaze drifted down to the ballroom far below. The tree's star gleamed like a guiding light. Beneath it, Ivy LaRue stood alone by the orchestra dais, humming softly, perhaps for comfort, perhaps out of habit. Her voice floated upward, fragile and human. Midway through the verse, it caught on a breath, a small, natural imperfection. Tuppence smiled faintly. There, that's the difference. The recording we heard earlier never breathed. No stumbles, no rhythm of life. It was a ghost of sound. But Ivy's voice, that's the living thing. Tommy's tone softened. You think she was used? Certainly. Perhaps willingly once, but not now. She's frightened, of the living more than the dead. Harding grunted. If you're done philosophizing about music, perhaps we can check the palm portion of your riddle. By all means, said Tuppence, though I suspect what we find there will play a darker note. The palm room lay at the rear of the hotel, a glass-roofed conservatory turned into a winter lounge, its palms drooping under condensation. The storm outside made the panes tremble faintly, so the candlelight within quivered in sympathy. Tommy and Harding entered first, their shoes echoing on the marble. Tuppence followed, eyes sharp as a cat's. Not many guests ventured here tonight, Harding murmured. It's too draughty. Except the one who arranged to, said Tuppence. Wilton's letter summoned him here at midnight. Harding nodded. And whoever forged it may have planned to stage an encounter that would look incriminating later. Tommy stooped suddenly. What's this on the doorframe? They leaned in. At shoulder height, faint even under the candlelight, was a smudge, a streak of deep red. Lipstick, said Tuppence. She touched it with her gloved fingertip, then sniffed lightly. Cranberry, the same shade from the champagne flute by the lectern. Harding's eyebrows rose. So, a woman was here, leaning in to listen, perhaps. Or to plant something, Tuppence said quietly. The brooch, maybe. They searched carefully. The room was strewn with upturned chairs and silk cushions, remnants of hasty rearrangements after the evening's chaos. A grand palm planter dominated one corner, its fronds rustling faintly in the draught. Tuppence circled it, and then stopped. There. She reached into the soil at the planter's base and drew out a small metal fragment, glinting faintly in the light. The clasp of the brooch, she said softly, broken clean. Tommy peered over her shoulder. So the diamond snowflake was here. Or what appeared to be the diamond snowflake, she corrected. If the clasp is here but the brooch gone, it suggests it was tampered with, repurposed perhaps. Harding frowned. Repurposed? Tuppence turned the clasp in her fingers. A brooch is hollow by design. Remove the jewel, fit a tiny glass vial inside, seal it with glue, and you have a perfect portable capsule. A glittering death on a pin. There was a silence, broken only by the faint rattle of palm fronds. Tommy exhaled. You mean the poison was hidden inside the ornament? Exactly, said Tuppence, worn by the killer or carried in a pocket, safe until the moment came to pour its contents into the flute. When Sir Peregrine lifted his glass, he drank not from a cup of cheer, but from a bauble of deceit. Harding rubbed his temples. A woman, then, the lipstick, the brooch. Not necessarily, Tuppence said sharply. Men have gifted jewels before using them for worse ends, and women, Inspector, are sometimes too obvious a suspect. Tommy chuckled softly. She's defending the gender, Harding. Best yield gracefully. But Tuppence wasn't smiling. Her gaze had gone distant, calculating. The letter to Wilton, the recording, the ribbon, all carefully planned. But this clasp feels accidental. A mistake. A crack in the mask. Meaning? Meaning our culprit rehearsed every detail but failed to account for the human element, fear, haste, perhaps guilt. Something happened in this room they didn't intend. Harding looked around. Perhaps they were interrupted. Perhaps. Tuppence's eyes drifted to the doorway again. Or perhaps they returned later, after the murder, to retrieve something they'd hidden. The real brooch, the file's casing, we've yet to find either." Tommy gave a low whistle. "And the midnight part of your message?" Tuppence folded her arms. "A meeting, a cover. Midnight was to be the finale, when our murderer would tie up their loose ends, perhaps confront their accomplice or reclaim their tool. But Sir Peregrine's death upset the schedule." "Leaving half the play unfinished," murmured Tommy. She nodded. "Exactly, which means the murderer may still try to finish it before morning." As they left the palm room, the wind howled down the corridor, shaking the window panes. The tree's reflection shimmered faintly in the hall's mirrors, the star still burning like an accusation. Tuppence paused on the threshold. "Tree Star Palm Midnight," she whispered again. "A path of misdirection ending in murder. But the last word, perhaps it's more than a time. Perhaps it's also a promise." Harding looked at her sharply. "Promise?" She smiled faintly. "To meet, to finish, to silence." Her gaze turned upward to the darkened balcony where shadows pooled between the beams. Whoever pulled the ribbon once may try to pull it again. Tommy offered her his arm. "Then perhaps we should stay up until midnight, darling. It seems the murderer has a date, and we'd hate for them to be stood up." And together they moved down the long corridor, their candle flames wavering, their footsteps echoing in the storm's steady rhythm, a rhythm as precise and relentless as the ticking of a clock toward its appointed hour. The clock in the hotel's foyer struck 2 in the morning. The wind outside battered the windows like a desperate hand. Inside the ballroom, the storm had become a sort of punctuation to the tension, each gust marking another round of interrogation. Inspector Harding stood before the assembled suspects, his shadow stretching long and black across the parquet. "We'll begin again," he said. "We reconstruct every minute. No speeches, no embellishments, only truth. Where was each of you when the lights flickered and Sir Peregrine fell?" Lady Veronica Ambrose sat nearest the fire, her silver gown gleaming faintly. She lifted her chin. "I was with the choir," she said evenly. "They were nervous, and I was distributing candles for the next number. The dim-out happened just then. The choirmaster can confirm it." All eyes turned to the thin, anxious man beside her, the choirmaster. He cleared his throat. "Yes, Lady Veronica was present, quite attentive, in fact." His gaze, however, slid away as he spoke, settling instead on the melted wax dripping from his candle. Tuppence, standing slightly apart with her notebook, noticed. "Attentive," she repeated softly. "To the choir, or to the timing?" The choirmaster's mouth twitched. "To the performance, naturally." Harding gave a small grunt. "We'll return to that." He turned to Ivy LaRue. The torch singer looked drawn, her lipstick faded, her voice softer now than at any moment that evening. "Miss LaRue?" "I was on stage," she said quickly. "Everyone saw me. The lights went funny, but I didn't stop singing." Harding nodded. "And Mr. Gray?" The American leaned back in his chair, cigarette smoke curling lazily. "I was at the bar, Inspector. I'd asked for rye. The barman was telling me they'd run out, so we were debating alternatives when everything went dark. You can ask him." Tuppence's eyes flicked toward him. "And you didn't glance toward the stage at all?" "Not until the scream," Gray replied. "After that, I doubt anyone looked anywhere else." Lionel Wilton was next, pale, hollow-eyed, his hands clasped like a penitent's. "I was nowhere near the lectern. I stayed by the doors. I couldn't face Peregrine again, not after that letter." "The forged letter," Harding corrected dryly. Wilton flushed. "I didn't know it was forged then." Tuppence's pen scratched gently across her page. "So, you were near the exit, Miss Elsie?" The maid jumped at her name. "In the cloakroom, ma'am. Collecting wraps and umbrellas. The corridor's dark there, and I heard music still playing, so I thought all was well." "Thank you," Tuppence said kindly. "You've been most consistent." Harding crossed his arms. "So, every one of you was occupied. Lady Veronica with the choir, Ivy on the stage, Gray at the bar, Wilton by the doors, and Elsie in the cloakroom. Convenient." A flicker of irritation passed over Lady Veronica's face. "Inspector, must we repeat this dance? I have told you my position repeatedly." "Indeed," said Tuppence, straightening. "And perhaps now you'll allow me to add a little music to accompany it." Harding arched an eyebrow. "Music?" Tuppence smiled. "The recording, the carol that didn't breathe." She nodded to the choirmaster, who looked alarmed. "If you please, sir, Let's have your choir sing the same verse again. Live, this time." The small group of singers, still shivering from the night strain, assembled at the foot of the stage. Tuppence placed the phonograph beside them and set the record spinning. The familiar tune began, "The Holly and the Ivy," sweet and precise. The choir joined in, following the melody exactly. Yet, as the song flowed, Tuppence's keen ear caught it, a barely perceptible hesitation, a half-breath between the third and fourth bars. She raised a hand sharply, stopping them. "There," she said. "Did you hear it, Inspector?" Harding frowned. "Barely, but yes, a slip." "Human," said Tuppence. "The recording, however, has no such fault." She lifted the needle, and the room filled once again with the flawless carol, smooth, mechanical, unbroken. When it ended, she turned back to the choirmaster. "Would you like to tell us why Lady Veronica requested a recording, Mr. Baines?" The man hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing. It was her idea. She said nerves might cause inconsistency. She wanted the gala to sound perfect. "Perfect," Tuppence repeated. "So she arranged for the choir to mime while the record played?" Baines nodded miserably. "Only as a precaution. I set up the phonograph and the remote pull mechanism behind the curtain. She supervised." Lady Veronica's expression did not waver. Perfection requires preparation. There was nothing sinister in it. "Perhaps not," said Tuppence lightly, "unless perfection also required a precisely timed distraction." Harding's gaze sharpened. "So she knew about the recording and the ribbon pull to trigger it?" "Certainly," Veronica replied, cool as ice. "I know many things about the evening. That hardly makes me a poisoner." Tuppence smiled faintly. "No, but it makes you the only person with the power to coordinate the illusion." The silence that followed was broken only by the hiss of the fire. Then Tuppence continued, her tone deceptively conversational. "Now, about the lipstick. The cranberry shade found on the flute, and again on the palm room doorframe. I did a bit of asking about shades, Lady Veronica. It seems that particular colour, Winter Cranberry No. 3, was discontinued 2 years ago, only obtainable from a private boutique you still patronise." Veronica's brows arched. "Half the women in Mayfair could have it." Tuppence inclined her head. "Quite true, but few wear it matte. The print on the glass was matte, not glossy, unlike Miss LaRue's. And while Lady Veronica favours a softer pink tonight, her preferred boutique is one of the few in London that still supplies that cranberry in a matte finish." Ivy bristled. "Mine's American brand, darling. Shiny as sin." Veronica's tone remained steady. "A detail of texture, hardly proof." "No," said Tuppence, "but it's another thread, and threads, when woven together, make quite the noose." Harding interjected. "We're not done with lipstick yet. Mr. Gray, you smoke imported cigarettes. So, incidentally, does Miss LaRue. The same brand was found crushed under the palm planter." Gray's jaw tightened. "So what? I drop them everywhere." "Convenient," murmured Tuppence. "A shared vice between performer and patron. The perfect camouflage for anyone wishing to implicate another." Harding turned toward her. "You mean the cigarettes could have been planted?" "Or borrowed," Tuppence replied. "Symbolic tokens, Inspector, like everything else this evening." Veronica's eyes flashed. "This is absurd. Every trinket, every gesture, you twist them into accusation." "Only where they point," Tuppence said calmly, "and they point most directly at your initials." Harding frowned. "Initials?" Tuppence drew a folded, torn sheet from her notebook. "From the hotel's maintenance log, found in a wastebasket behind the conservatory. The page that records access to the cabinet containing foxglove tincture, the very substance used to preserve floral arrangements. Someone removed it to hide their signature." She unfolded the paper and laid it on the table. In the top corner, faint but legible, stood 2 letters. V.A. Harding's eyes narrowed. Lady Veronica Ambrose. Veronica rose, a queen defying her court. "I authorised floral deliveries. Nothing more. If the page was removed, it was out of confusion, not deceit." Tuppence's gaze was cool and unwavering. "And the hour signed?" 5 in the afternoon, said Harding, scanning it, just before the gala began. "Exactly," said Tuppence. "Enough time to tamper with a cabinet, extract a tincture, and hide it inside an ornament." Veronica's composure cracked, if only for an instant. Her hand trembled against the back of her chair before she withdrew it. Tommy spoke softly. "You had everything, Lady Veronica. Control of the staff, the choir, the schedule. You could choreograph every note of the evening." Her eyes turned on him, sharp, furious. "And if I did? If I planned every candle, every carol, every ribbon, it was to keep the charity alive. Sir Peregrine would have ruined us with his self-righteous reforms. The donors would have fled." Harding's voice cut through her rising tone. "You're admitting motive, my lady." "I'm admitting devotion," she snapped. "To the cause, not to murder." The wind gave a long, mournful cry against the windows. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Tuppence closed her notebook with a soft click. "Perhaps you didn't intend it to go so far," she said gently. "Perhaps you only meant to frighten him, to silence him for a night. But poisons, like lies, are unpredictable things." Lady Veronica's eyes glimmered, not with tears but with fury. "You will regret this insolence, Mrs. Beresford." Tuppence's tone was mild. "I usually do, but rarely am I wrong." Harding turned to his constables. "Keep everyone in their rooms. No one leaves. We'll resume at dawn." As the guests dispersed, some muttering, some weeping, some silent, Tuppence lingered by the fire, watching the flames gutter low. Tommy joined her quietly. "Think she's guilty," he murmured. "She's orchestrated," Tuppence said. "Guiltier than most, perhaps, but something still plays out of tune." Tommy smiled faintly. "Then we haven't reached the finale yet." "No," she said softly, eyes distant. "And when the curtain falls, I suspect one of our players won't get their encore." The storm had quieted to a whisper by morning, leaving Harrington Hall wrapped in a pale, exhausted silence. Snow clung to the windows like lace, and the ballroom smelled faintly of wax, pine, and coffee. What had once been a festive hall was now a stage for reckoning. Inspector Harding stood at the centre of the room, his notes neatly stacked, his eyes red-rimmed but alert. Around him the principal guests, Lady Veronica, Lionel Wilton, Ivy LaRue, Cassius Gray, and the trembling Elsie, gathered in stiff silence. The choir huddled by the back doors, whispering prayers that had nothing to do with hymns. Tuppence Beresford, precise and calm, stood beside the grand tree. Tommy lingered near the lectern, hands in his pockets, looking like a man about to play a magician's trick. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tuppence began, her voice clear and unhurried, "we've all endured a dreadful night, but I believe it's best to confront facts in daylight. Last evening's gala was, in every sense, a performance, and now, with Inspector Harding's permission, we shall have one more." Lady Veronica's mouth tightened. "Really, Mrs. Beresford, must we turn grief into spectacle?" Tuppence smiled faintly. "Not spectacle, Lady Veronica. Demonstration. The difference is truth." Harding gave a nod. "Proceed." Tuppence gestured toward the Christmas tree. "You will observe that the topmost ornament, the snowflake star, has been rehung. It is a harmless replica matching last night's display piece. It hangs by a fine thread." The guests shifted uneasily. "Now," said Tuppence, "we shall replay the scene as it occurred. Mr. Beresford, if you'll take your place near the lectern." Tommy grinned. "Ready when you are, partner." Tuppence crossed to the cloakroom corridor and took hold of a red ribbon, the very one she had retrieved from the Evergreen swag hours before. Its end disappeared into the rafters above the stage, where it connected to the phonograph's remote lever. "Watch carefully," she said. With a gentle tug, the ribbon drew taut. The phonograph whirred to life. The carol began. The holly and the ivy, flawless, mechanical, without breath or human warmth. Harding's eyes widened. "Just as last night." "Yes," said Tuppence softly. "Every eye on the stage, every guest entranced. In that half-darkness amid the music, a single movement could go unseen." As she spoke, Tommy approached the lectern. 2 champagne flutes sat waiting. Without fanfare, he exchanged them. Swift, practiced, invisible. "No trick," Tuppence continued, "merely the right distraction. If one wished, one might preload a vial hidden within a brooch clasp, the genuine snowflake brooch's clasp, removed beforehand and repurposed as a tiny phial. A small twist of the pin would release its contents into the drink. In changing a glass, the clasp could snap, leaving behind a glittering fragment. From her pocket she withdrew the tiny shard found in the palm room planter. It caught the morning light like a drop of ice. "This fell upon Sir Peregrine's coat," she said, "and it was no accident." Lady Veronica gave a short, brittle laugh. "A clever parlour trick, Mrs. Beresford, but hardly proof of murder." "True," Tuppence agreed. "So let's move from trick to temperament." She returned to the phonograph and lifted the needle. "Listen, all of you, to the perfection of that recording. Seamless, inhuman." She looked directly at Lady Veronica. "Perfection is not human, but controlling persons love it." A silence followed, soft, charged, dangerous. Then Tuppence spoke again, her tone quiet, almost conversational. Sir Peregrine Vale was about to expose irregularities in the charity's accounts. But those irregularities didn't begin with poor Mr. Wilton. They began years ago, during the war, when the Ambrose Foundation handled government contracts. Your late husband, Lady Veronica, oversaw those contracts. Sir Peregrine found the old files. He meant to publish. Lady Veronica's face remained a mask. Baseless conjecture. "Is it?" Tuppence lifted a paper from Harding's folder. "Inspector Harding has verified that Sir Peregrine requested the original records from the Treasury 3 weeks ago. The files detailed inflated invoices, fraudulent supply deliveries made under your husband's signature, and profits disguised as charitable surplus. Sir Peregrine believed those funds never reached the needy. They funded luxury and influence." Lionel Wilton covered his face with his hands. Ivy gasped. Cassius Gray gave a low whistle. Harding said flatly, "We have confirmation of those documents, Lady Veronica." Her voice, when it came, was calm and cold. "My husband is dead. You cannot defame him." Tuppence's tone was gentle. "No, but you could silence the man who intended to expose him. You arranged the gala yourself, controlled every staff list, rehearsal and schedule. You ordered the recording, managed the lighting, and even secured the cabinet containing foxglove tinctures. You alone could weave every element together, the ribbon, the music, the drink." Veronica's knuckles whitened on her armrest. "You flatter my efficiency, Mrs. Beresford." "I admire it," Tuppence said softly. "But you made one mistake. You strove for perfection, and perfection is unnatural. You chose a recording so flawless it betrayed you. You wore a lipstick no one else in London could buy. You signed a cabinet log at an hour no one expected. Every detail meant to secure control. Every one your undoing." Veronica's breath caught, but she recovered instantly. "Proof, Mrs. Beresford. You still lack proof." "Then allow me to supply it." Tuppence turned to Harding. "Inspector, you have the letter from Sir Peregrine's pocketbook?" He handed it over. Tuppence unfolded it, reading aloud. "Dear Lady Veronica, before taking this public, I offer you the courtesy of a private discussion. If you will acknowledge the Ambrose contracts and disclose the sums misallocated, I shall recommend quiet restitution rather than exposure. Midnight next Friday, at the Palm Room." A collective murmur rippled through the room. "And her reply?" asked Tommy. Tuppence drew another sheet, a carbon copy recovered from the secretary's files that morning. Her words, dated the following day: "The season forbids ugliness, Sir Peregrine. Let us not spoil it with unpleasantness." The words hung in the air like frost. Lady Veronica rose to her feet. "You twist courtesy into guilt." Harding stepped forward. "We also recovered the maintenance log's carbon copy from the hotel office. It shows your initials, V.A., authorizing access to the conservatory cabinet at 10 that morning. The staff confirms you dismissed the gardener immediately after." Her composure cracked. For an instant the mask slipped, the strain visible, the edges frayed. "You fools," she hissed. "Do you think you understand sacrifice? I preserved something noble, a name, a legacy, a charity that still fed the poor while your newspapers feasted on ruin." Tuppence's voice was gentle, almost pitying. "And you preserved it by poisoning one man and deceiving 100 more. Noble ends seldom bloom from poisonous roots, Lady Veronica." The older woman stood trembling. Her pearls quivered against her collarbone. One snapped loose and rolled across the floor, striking the parquet with a tiny, pitiless sound. Harding said quietly, "Lady Veronica Ambrose, I must ask you to come with me." She drew herself up, the grandeur returning for a moment. "No, I will walk out of this room on my own terms." Harding nodded to his men, but she needed no prompting. She crossed the ballroom slowly, past the dim tree and its glimmering ornaments. At the door she turned once more, her voice low but clear. "I built beauty," she said, "and you prefer ruin." Then she was gone. The silence afterward was immense. The candles guttered in their pools of wax. One of the choir girls began to cry softly. Tommy exhaled. "Well, that's Christmas spoiled for her social calendar." Tuppence gave him a weary smile. "Perfection has its price, my dear, and it never comes cheap." Harding approached, tucking his notebook into his coat. "You're quite a pair," he said. "I'll see that she's taken quietly. The courts can handle the rest." As he left, the first weak light of dawn crept through the windows, washing the ballroom in grey. The grand tree stood forlorn, its decorations trembling faintly in the draught. Tuppence reached up and touched one of the ornaments, a small glass bauble shaped like a snowflake. It wobbled once, then dropped, shattering at her feet. Tommy chuckled softly. "Fitting, really. Every ornament falls in the end." She nodded. "Yes, and when they do, the glitter turns to dust." The music room beyond was empty now, but faintly, impossibly, the phonograph gave a single click, as if remembering. A ghostly carol hummed for one last moment before the needle lifted and silence took its place. Outside, the snow began again, soft and clean, covering Harrington Hall like forgiveness. The palm room had grown heavy with the scent of overwatered earth and dying orchids. Outside, the storm had softened to a steady whisper against the glass dome, its muted percussion echoing faintly through the tropical stillness. Warm air stirred the long fronds of the palms, and in their rustling there was a sound almost like breath, the slow, exhausted sigh of something that had reached its end. Inspector Harding stood by the door, arms folded, his silhouette grim against the pale light filtering through the frosted panes. Beside him, Tommy leaned against a marble planter, outwardly relaxed but keen-eyed beneath his casual charm. Tuppence stood a few paces from Lady Veronica Ambrose, who faced the window, her reflection ghostly among the glass and foliage. For a long while, no one spoke. Finally, Harding broke the silence. "Lady Veronica, you understand your rights. I've asked you here to make your statement privately, for the record, if you wish to give one." Veronica's voice came quiet, steady, and far older than the woman who had commanded the gala only a night before. "Yes, Inspector, I understand." She did not turn as she spoke. The pale morning light caught in her hair, a glint of silver that matched the frost clinging to the palms outside. "I did not mean for it to end in death," she said. "You must believe that." Tuppence took a step forward, her tone gentle. "Then tell us how it was meant to end." Veronica's hand rested on the glass. "I meant to frighten him, Sir Peregrine. Nothing more. A dose of sedative, heavy enough to bring on faintness, something to humble him, to stop his crusade before he destroyed everything." "Destroyed what?" Harding asked. "The charity," she said sharply, spinning at last to face them. "Do you understand what his revelation would have done? The Ambrose Fund feeds 2,000 families each winter, sends children to schools, pays for hospitals. Peregrine Vale would have brought it all crashing down with one self-righteous article, because of my husband's mistakes." Tommy said softly, "Not only his, perhaps." A flicker crossed her face. Guilt, anger, memory. "He was ambitious," she said. "He turned wartime contracts into a legacy of philanthropy. Yes, the funds were washed, if you insist on the term. But what harm if the end was good? Do you tear down a house to rid it of one rotten beam?" Tuppence's voice was quiet but firm. "Because rot spreads, Lady Veronica. You build new, with clean timber, not corruption." For the first time, Veronica looked directly at her, and something faltered in the fine poise of her expression. "You are young enough to believe in purity, Mrs. Beresford. I am old enough to know there are times when compromise is mercy." "Mercy doesn't come in crystal flutes," Tommy said dryly. She gave a brittle laugh, not mirthful but almost admiring. "You're clever, both of you. I see now that you would have found it out no matter what I did." Harding said, "Tell it all, Lady Veronica, for the record." Veronica turned again toward the window as though seeking steadiness from the sight of snow drifting beyond the glass. "It began when I learned Sir Peregrine had obtained the fund's wartime files. My secretary told me of his letter, his offer of a private discussion before publication. I knew he would not be satisfied with promises. He wanted names, signatures, confessions. I couldn't allow that. She moved slowly toward the palm planter, tracing its rim with one manicured hand. The gala was my last chance. I arranged every detail, the carols, the lighting, the speeches. I asked the choirmaster to prepare a recording, told him it was in case of nerves. I rehearsed the ribbon pull with the stagehands myself. Everything had to appear perfect. Tuppence nodded, expression grave. You used perfection to hide a crime. I used it to hide a mistake, Veronica said quietly. When I entered the conservatory that afternoon, I intended to take only a mild sedative from the cabinet, something to make him ill, drowsy, not to kill. But when I tested the tinctures, I chose the wrong bottle. The foxglove solution, Harding said. Yes. Her voice was little more than a whisper. The labels were there. I saw them. I knew. The last words fell like stones into the stillness. You knew, Tuppence repeated softly. Veronica nodded slowly. I told myself it was fate, that perhaps Providence meant to spare me the scandal. I told myself a great many things that night. Tommy's voice came, low and edged with disbelief. So you went through with it. You staged a murder under the veil of Christmas charity. Veronica's eyes flashed. Do not mock me, Mr. Beresford. You've no idea what it costs to preserve a name in this world, to keep one's work, one's people, from being crushed under disgrace. You and your wife hunt wickedness for sport. I was trying to save something good. Tuppence stepped forward again, her tone steady. You can't save good by poisoning truth. Veronica's shoulders sagged. No, you can't. She sank into a chair beside the planter, her hand trembling slightly as she drew a handkerchief from her sleeve. When the carol began, I stood behind the curtains. I saw the choir begin to mime their song. I pulled the ribbon once lightly to start the recording. Tommy is right. It was like theatre. Everyone watching the stage, no one looking toward the lectern. In that moment, I replaced the glasses. The vial inside the brooch had already been cracked open. I slipped the ornament's clasp into my pocket, meaning to collect it later. Then the lights flickered, sooner than I'd planned, and the toast began. The next instant, he was on the floor. A faint shudder passed through her. The sound he made, I shall hear it always. Tommy said gently, You rehearsed even the choirmaster, didn't you? Yes. I told him the fund would sponsor his next concert season. He would have agreed to anything. And the letter to Wilton? She gave a weary smile. My secretary typed it from my dictation. Sir Peregrine's signature I copied from an old note he'd once written to the fund. I meant Wilton to seem guilty if the worst happened, to protect the charity from further scandal. He was weak enough to suspect and innocent enough to believe himself doomed. Harding scribbled briefly in his notebook. And the lipstick, the marks on the glass and in the palm room. A flicker of self-mockery crossed her face. Vanity, she murmured. Vanity is sloppy at the edges. I retouched my lips before entering the hall to face the photographers. The shade was my signature, my little armour. But armour, it seems, leaves prints. No one spoke for a long time. The palms rustled faintly in the heated air. At last, Harding said, You understand, Lady Veronica, that this statement will serve as confession. I understand, he nodded. Then sign it here. She took the pen he offered. Her handwriting, even now, was elegant and precise, though the ink trembled slightly on the paper. When she finished, she set the pen down carefully beside the document and rose. Her gaze met Tuppence's. Do you despise me, Mrs. Beresford? Tuppence shook her head. No, I pity you. You believed control could outwit conscience. It never can. A faint smile, almost tender, touched Veronica's lips. You'll learn one day that conscience is a poor companion in a ruthless world. Tommy muttered, Still better than foxglove. The smallest ghost of laughter escaped her then, broken, sad, and brief. Harding called in a constable. The uniformed man entered quietly, his expression subdued. Take Lady Veronica to the inspector's car, Harding said. She walked toward the door without protest. As she passed, her perfume, faintly floral, faintly chemical, lingered in the warm air like a final trace of deception. When the door closed, the palms shivered once more, as though releasing a breath they had been holding. In the silence that followed, Tuppence turned to the small figure hovering in the doorway. Elsie, the maid, pale as linen, her hands twisting in her apron. It's over now, Tuppence said gently. You did the right thing. Elsie's voice shook. "I didn't want to name her, Mum. She was a lady." Tuppence placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Being a lady is a matter of manners, not immunity." The maid nodded, tears bright in her eyes. As they stepped out into the corridor, Tommy glanced back at the palm room, at the orchids nodding faintly in the lamplight, at the empty chair by the window where Lady Veronica had stood. "Funny thing about rot," he said quietly. "You never see it spreading until the whole trunk's hollow." Tuppence sighed. "And then it takes only one touch for everything to fall." The palms rustled again behind them, a soft, ghostly applause, as they walked away into the dim morning hall. The city woke beneath a pale, rinsed sky. Overnight, the storm had spent its fury and left London luminous, a clean white hush upon rooftops and railings, a glittering frost on the railings along the Strand. The air, sharp and cold, carried the far-off sound of church bells, marking the first morning of peace after the night's storm and scandal. Inside the Harrington Hotel, the grand ballroom was unrecognisable. The garlands drooped a little now, the champagne bottles stood like ghosts of gaiety, and the great Christmas tree shimmered faintly in the thin daylight. Inspector Harding's men moved briskly, efficient yet subdued, the scrape of their boots echoing softly across the polished floor. At the foyer's marble threshold, Lady Veronica Ambrose stood composed as ever, though her elegance had taken on the air of something sculpted, beauty fixed in stone. Harding waited beside her, hat in hand, as she adjusted her gloves with steady fingers. She turned once to Tuppence and Tommy, who stood near the grand staircase. "There are many who will not understand," she said. Her voice was low, stripped of grandeur now. Tuppence met her gaze gently. "Some will, in time." A faint nod, no tears, no apology. The click of her heels echoed across the marble as Harding led her away. The doors opened to the white street beyond, the carriage lamps gleaming against the snow. Then, just as quietly, they closed behind her. For a moment, the hotel seemed to exhale. Guests, pale and chastened, began to drift from the lounges where they'd been sequestered all night, fur collars buttoned, valises in hand, voices hushed as though in chapel. A maid moved softly about, collecting abandoned programmes and extinguished candles. The faint scent of pine and wax hung in the air. Lionel Wilton approached the Beresfords in the lounge. His face was grey, his eyes raw from sleeplessness. "I suppose it's done," he said quietly. Tuppence nodded. "Inspector Harding will see the accounts reviewed properly. There'll be consequences, but leniency too if you continue to cooperate." He nodded slowly, gripping his hat in both hands. "I will repay every penny I took, I swear it. It seems I was never meant for finance, only foolishness." Tommy clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "There are worse things to be than foolish, old chap. Just don't make it a habit." Wilton's tired eyes flickered with the smallest hint of gratitude. "You two, you've a way of making even ruin sound almost decent." When he left, Ivy LaRue was waiting by the window, her wrap drawn tightly around her slender shoulders. The morning light found her reflection in the glass. Less glitter now, more girl. "I've been thinking," she said, voice softer than usual. "I had this grand notion. A scandal might make the papers remember me. But after last night, I think I'd rather they remember the singing." Tuppence smiled. "There's always another verse, Miss LaRue. You've time to sing it properly." Ivy's lips curved into a rueful grin. "Then I'll make sure it's live, and a little wobbly. That's the charm, isn't it?" She drifted off toward the revolving doors, leaving the scent of gardenia and humility in her wake. A telegram boy in a red cap stepped through the snow just as Mr. Gray came down the stairs, scarf perfectly knotted despite the sleepless night. He tore open the message, scanned it, and gave a low whistle. "My board back in New York," he said to Tommy. "I wired them this morning. We're donating to the Ambrose Fund. Full audit, full transparency, and no naming rights." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Generous or strategic?" "Both," Gray replied. "But for once I'll settle for the generous part." When the guests had gone and the bustle quieted, the Beresfords returned to the ballroom. It lay silent now, the sunlight glinting through the tall windows, catching the ornaments that still hung from the tree. The lights were out, the recording silent, the air faintly scented with evergreen and endings. Tuppence looked up at the tree. "It's strange," she murmured, "how something so beautiful can feel so heavy once the music stops." Tommy glanced at the empty stage. "Beauty's a poor disguise for guilt, old girl. It cracks under pressure." She reached into her pocket and drew out the harmless twin ornament, the clear glass snowflake identical to the one that had hidden the fatal vial. Carefully, she stepped onto a chair and hung it back at the tree's highest tier. The glass caught the morning sun, scattering prisms across the faded parquet. "There," she said softly, "back where it belongs." As she descended, Tommy chuckled. "You'd make quite the stage manager, Tuppence. Nothing left misplaced." "Oh, there's always something," she said, gazing up at the glittering star. "But it's the imperfection that proves we're human." She began to hum the carol, the holly and the ivy, the same tune that had filled the room the night before. But now her version was tender and alive. The small breaths between lines, the little slips in rhythm, the warmth of a real voice unpolished by any record. Tommy listened, hands in his pockets, smiling. "Perfection," he said softly, "isn't the point, old thing." "No," Tuppence replied, meeting his gaze. "Integrity is." He took her hand, and together they walked to the great doors. Outside, the city was stirring. Bells pealed from St. Martin's, bright and brimming with new day. Shopkeepers swept snow from their thresholds. Cabs rattled along slush-lined streets. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing up at the Harringtons' wreath still gleaming faintly above the entrance. "Look, Mummy, the Christmas hotel." The mother smiled, and the pair moved on, leaving small, perfect footprints in the snow. Tommy glanced back once at the building. The wreath, with its red ribbon, shone like a final punctuation mark, the end of a long, tangled sentence. "Another case tied with ribbon," he murmured. Tuppence squeezed his hand. "And may the next one begin with kindness." From somewhere down the street, faint but clear, a choir began to sing, not flawless, not rehearsed, but alive. The notes rose, trembling slightly, carried by the cold air into the bright new morning. The Beresfords paused to listen. Then they turned toward the Strand, their footprints joining the city's own, vanishing into the whiteness of Christmas.